Good afternoon, dear participants. My name is Robert Sukiasyan. I'll be moderating this panel named Gurdjieff and Science. So, today we will hear four perspectives that explore the intersections of Gurdjieff's teachings with philosophy, neuroscience, ontology, and practice. Each presentation brings a different angle to the central question of how Gurdjieff's ideas may be understood as a science of human transformation. So our four speakers are Dimitri Peretzi, Tom Clark, David Mosinyan, Ani Haiktateos Postanyan, and I will introduce each of them in turn before their presentations. So the first speaker, which will join us with a video message, is Dimitri Peretzi, who is the director of Gurdjieff Foundation of Greece. He pursued graduate work in philosophy at Yale University and has lectured widely in Paris, New York, London, Amsterdam on Gurdjieff's teachings and practice. The author of several books, articles, and plays, he approaches the teaching primarily through the lens of philosophy of mind. His presentation is titled How Scientific is Gurdjieff's Science? I'll turn it on in a moment.
I think the other night the meeting of the topic tonight is how scientific is Gurdjieff's science.
Gurdjieff insisted that his ideas on working on oneself constitute an objective science. Does it make any sense that his science is indeed objective, as opposed to contemporary academic science, which he calls subjective?
Jesus involved. There's Arborishi involved in this. First of all, who's to decide? Who's to decide whether the G of science is scientific? Can people who believe these ideas go about talking about objective science, scientific ideas, just in press? What is any reason for it? And who will judge whether it is so or not? The answer is, it is epistemology that has this up. Epistemology is a section of philosophy that answers this question: what is science and what is scientific? They are the ones who have posed the issue to begin with. The issue what is scientific, and the standards by which we answer the question is to be answered. So if we're talking about something being scientific, it is they who would have to decide if it is scientific or not. This means the question has to be answered in their terms. And of course, the question would be raised as well, why bother with this? Do we have to prove anything? Well, to begin with, Gurdjieff insisted that everything that is said in the context of the fourth way is to be verified. So this has to be verified as well. And there's another side to the question of why bother. Does the word gain anything from it? With the word benefit, it is proven to be scientific. The answer given in the context of this talk is yes, it will benefit.
The thesis of this presentation, the benefit of establishing the scientific nature of Gurdjieff's ideas, is related to the endurance and the longevity of the work.
People may disagree today, but this is the thesis of this presentation. The many reasons indeed of this is so, we cannot analyze forward the day, the trade, and let's put it. In fact, the 2 points that are made by his reputation is that
1. Gurdjieff's way of describing reality conforms to all of philosophy of science's epistemological criteria regarding being scientific. 2. Moreover, there are angles from which one can view Gurdjieff's ideas, according to which it makes perfect sense to claim that his approach to science is objective, as opposed to that of the current academic science, which can be shown to be subjective, line of approach to the subject, the study of consciousness.
and the line of approach is that it that is the study of consciousness. In the study of consciousness, through the attempt to study and describe consciousness, it can be shown that Gurdjieff's ideas can be called objective, whereas those of academic science are to be viewed as subjective. We have approached the line of approach to a subject is the study of consciousness. The central point in the geoscientific investigation was the study of consciousness, as opposed to that of third science, which is the study of unconscious matter. The subject matter that the study of recent bodies, the Gurdjieff's work is all about study of consciousness, whereas academic sciences is about the study of mouth. And these two points of view put to a confrontation when you take into account the fact that Gurdjieff's play is a process, is a dynamic phenomenon which can evolve in man, whereas spirit science sees consciousness as something that makes anyway that refers to its own ideas about objectivity.
In fact, what scientists and some of the best known contemporary philosophers who study the mind have said about the way that academic science deals with consciousness is exactly that their approach to the matter is subjective. David Chalmers, in 1994, said, "Not everybody agrees on what the problem of consciousness is about, and no one agrees with anybody else as to where its solution lies." Yerevan in 1995, "It is not clear that everybody means the same thing by consciousness, even within the domain of the same science." Michael Tai in 1997, "One of the difficulties of judging the theories presented about consciousness is the fact that it is not always clear what the subject matter is, nor is it clear what the problems are that these theories are trying to solve." Roger Penrose, a Nobel Prize in Physics in 2020, "The effort to give a naturalistic explanation of consciousness would demand a revolution in the basic structure of traditional physics."
So the question of that, if the way by which academic science studies and describes the world is objective, that is, if science views reality as it really is, then why are scientists in no position to deal with consciousness in ways that they agree amongst themselves what exactly it is that they're studying in their thought?
For someone who knows, understands, and thus believes that consciousness can evolve in man, it is evident that science's way of studying it will lead to a dead end. If one attempts to study what a seed is and refuses to take into account the objective fact that this thing that is called a seed has the potential to grow into a new plant, this study will inevitably lead one to a dead end.
So we're left with Gurdjieff. Science proves negative the will the concept part. When within the foreseeable future was not prepared be, but they be made irreparable, and especially a spinning of conscious evolver. It will he be eat patience. These are the right. But we the same in Tatin wishes again. We relate to the gift of man the same. Do I, each one of us, that man be seen, and that conscious did not touch in me with true potential? Does it prove that me, you, and I are asleep right now? Is it also has a possibility for a person to develop consciousness in him during his or her life? Is there agreement that this is the most important thing in one's life? For one to occupy oneself with?
If we know, if we understand, and thus if we believe that consciousness can evolve in man, then the ability of any theory to deal rationally with consciousness, which is the tool of cognition and knowledge itself, becomes the central point of any philosophical and scientific investigation, and the main criterion of such an investigation being objective. In fact, the idea that man is an incomplete being is not novel. It is encountered in religious and philosophical traditions since time immemorial. Plato has said, "It is as if men are chained motionless in a cave. The only thing that people can see is the shadows of the real world, as the world is projected on the wall in front of them." Plotinus, "It is as if people spend their lives in sleep and take their dreams for real. If someone were to be awakened, he wouldn't believe his own eyes and would go back to sleep as soon as possible." From the Christian tradition, man lives in sin, hamartia, which means loss of target. And from the Hindu tradition, man lives in illusion, maya. What he thinks to be reality is the way that the senses deceive the mind.
In fact, this idea of man's incompleteness, of his being possible to evolve, is encountered even in contemporary philosophy.
Immanuel Kant, "There is an idea present since the distant past, but people either have never understood it or they have considered it to be theoretical. If we consider the ancient philosophers, Epicure, Zeno, Socrates, etc., we shall discover that the main point of their investigation was man's ultimate destination and the path to reach it. Thus, they were much closer to the idea of real philosophy than we are, when contemporary philosophy has become the craft of logicians. Martin Heidegger: man's presence in the world, Dasein, is unauthentic.
The point shared by all these ways of referring to the incompleteness of man's usual condition is that human consciousness functions at a level lower than its potential. For someone who understands the meaning of this and shares this view, his only goal in life can be to find a way to reach his higher potential. On the other hand, it has to be made absolutely clear that contemporary academic philosophy denies any possibility for consciousness to evolve in man.
Through espousing the idea that consciousness is intentional, that is, exclusively directed towards the world, as do Edmund Husserl, Jean-Paul Sartre, Merleau-Ponty, John Searle, cognitive science as a whole, and for all I know, all contemporary philosophers of mind, academic philosophers and scientists have rejected altogether the concept that consciousness in man may develop or advance in any way. In fact, current academic philosophy uses persistent arguments to prove that the lingual expression knowledge of self can have no real meaning, and that it is rationally impossible for a person to observe himself. At the same time, the fact that academic science's points of view are altogether subjective is demonstrated by the fact that scientists cannot deal with consciousness in any rational way that would be compatible with the ways that they themselves describe matter. And it is also demonstrated by the fact that when it comes to investigating consciousness, they cannot agree with one another what it is that they are talking about.
The point that is brought here is quite delicate. Often people who approach the issue of the relationship between the Gurdjieff ideas and science are trying to show that it is possible to adapt Gurdjieff's terminology so as to make it compatible with scientific views, to show that it is not in contradiction. When we stand to the core of the matter, the core being the study of consciousness, we see that contemporary science's views and Gurdjieff's are in direct opposition. They cannot coexist. Sartre, Merleau-Ponty have spent pages and pages to prove that it is impossible to observe oneself. The argument is that if it were possible for me to observe myself, then this would mean that I did be something different than myself. And this is illogical. It's a logical impossibility. But I condense something that they have spent books and volumes to write about. These two points of view are incompatible. If we believe in logic, one has to be right and the other one has to be wrong.
There is an obvious contradiction here between Gurdjieff's ideas and contemporary academics' philosophy and science. How is it possible But scientists and philosophers of the mind have left the whole issue of the development of consciousness without attempting to investigate it seriously, when ancient philosophy and religious traditions insist that man's efforts to develop is the pinnacle of human endeavor.
Are all the old philosophers mistaken? Do all monks spend their lives in useless practices? Are all the saints and spiritual teachers' references to higher states of consciousness the result of illusion and naivety? Are contemporary academics wise? Why all of them old fellas were moonstruck and misguided? Is it sufficient to discard their ideas by calling them idealistic, like Plato's ideas? Could any objective approach to natural phenomena come out of beliefs of consciousness such as those of contemporary science? If we imagine the future of the study of consciousness, and I'm not talking the future within the next few decades, but for a long, long time, will philosophy never come to the concept that consciousness can evolve and develop? That there are different kinds or different modes of consciousness, concepts that are non-existent in today's science? The point of his idea, of Gurdjieff's idea about consciousness, is that a person can work on himself or herself to expand one's state of being into the third and fourth modalities that consciousness can be operated in, of which one will remain oblivious throughout one's life unless one undertakes the demanding task of working on oneself. Except for the work he did on himself and with others, Gurdjieff toiled throughout his life to present to his ideas a coherent cognitive structure that can deal consistently
both with matter in the usual form we know it in, as well as with consciousness and with describing the conditions in which it can develop.
well. People who are interested in the Gurdjieff ideas, scientists who are interested in the Gurdjieff ideas, are making efforts to show that the ideas are indeed scientific, that Gurdjieff's ideas are indeed scientific, and the way that they make sense. They make scientific sense, not just allegorical descriptions of romantic states, emotional states. If the Gurdjieff ideas are to prove that they have some kind of advantage, the approach of different states of consciousness, for example, has any kind of advantage over the approach that has been selected and followed by academic science, then there are two topics that these ideas have to give answers to show that they can deal with the problem of consciousness more effectively. First, give answer to the hard question about consciousness. The hard question being, how does consciousness arise from the matter that constitutes the brain? And the second is to give a general model for the functioning of the mind. What would this mean? It means that we accept the fact that emotional states affect our way of thinking, affect our ability to solve problems. But such problems are not such issues have not been studied down to the point of giving descriptions for them that make any sense. On the other hand, there are issues in the way that Gurdjieff presented his ideas that may cause controversy. Such issues include
his introduction of the ray of creation. How scientific is the idea of different worlds that are distinct from one another? His symbolism of the octave. What does music have to do with physics and with talking about the world? Gurdjieff's law of 3 and law of 7 as laws that govern everything. What is the relationship of these laws to the ordinary laws of physics? The enneagram as universal symbol of everything that exists. The use of a symbol is a matter of agreement. How could a symbol be universal? The idea of the 3 centers. How is the idea of the 3 centers related to the actual human anatomy? Gurdjieff's description of matter in terms of hydrogens, carbons, oxygens, and nitrogens. Why use science's original terms differently than the way that ordinary science is employing them?
all these issues can be resolved. The problem is that it is not easy to do so, and of course, the time element is crucial. There is no way that we can deal with all these issues in the limited time we have available tonight.
Yeah, that's the end of the presentation.